Hi there, and welcome back to the British Accent Podcast. I'm Emily.
And I'm Nick. Lovely to have you with us. Today we're diving into something that's deeply personal for a lot of English learners, telling the story of your pain, but doing it softly, in a way that doesn't reopen every wound.
Yeah. It's something we don't talk about enough. Language isn't just about sharing facts or opinions, it's also about telling your story. And for many learners, that story includes pain, loss, shame. Things that are hard to speak about, even in your first language.
Especially in your first language, I'd say. Sometimes it feels too close. Too raw. But then, when people start expressing themselves in English, something shifts. There's a bit of distance, and in that distance, there's space to breathe.
Exactly. English can become a soft place to land. Not because it erases your story, but because it gives you a new way to carry it. You don't have to pour everything out all at once. You can choose your words. You can go gently.
I remember a listener once said, "When I speak in English, it's like I'm holding my pain with gloves on. I can look at it. I can talk about it. But it doesn't hurt as much." That really stuck with me.
Me too. Because we often think of English as something we need to be perfect in, to get a job, to pass a test. But for many people, English becomes a quiet container for feelings that were too messy, too tangled, in their own language.
So today, we're not giving grammar tips. We're talking about emotional fluency, how to talk about difficult things in a way that feels safe, honest, but also kind to yourself.
You don't have to tell the whole story in one sentence. You can begin with, "It was a hard time." Or "I felt alone." Or even just, "Something happened that changed me." That's enough.
And sometimes, just learning how to say those simple phrases in English, "I was hurt, I'm still healing, I don't talk about it often," that's a kind of progress that no test can measure.
Absolutely. Because when you can name your pain gently, you're not running from it anymore. You're walking with it. And English, somehow, becomes the companion on that walk.
It's funny, isn't it, how a second language can actually make you more honest, not less. You'd think using a language that's not your own would create distance, but sometimes, it creates courage.
Because the pressure to explain everything perfectly disappears. You start small. You say what you can. And in that simplicity, the truth finds its way out.
It's a bit like writing in a journal. You don't have to impress anyone. You're not performing. You're just choosing a sentence that feels safe. Like, "I struggled," or "I felt like I didn't belong." And that can open up a door.
And you can stop anytime. That's the thing people forget. Telling your story doesn't mean you owe the full chapter to anyone. Sometimes, just a few lines are enough. "I left home early. I lost someone. That time was dark." Those are full stories in just a few words.
And sometimes, when learners say those things in English, there's a bit of silence afterward, not awkward, but gentle. Like they're sitting with the emotion for the first time, and letting themselves feel it without it overwhelming them.
Yeah. And maybe that's the real beauty of it. English gives you a slightly different rhythm. You pause more. You consider your words. And in that slow pacing, you treat your own experience with more care.
I've noticed that too. The pauses aren't just because someone is translating or searching for vocabulary. Sometimes they're honoring the weight of what they're saying. Giving themselves time to breathe through it.
Exactly. And I always think, that's emotional intelligence. That's fluency in a deeper sense. Not using big words, but speaking your truth without hurting yourself in the process.
So if you're someone listening to this, wondering if it's okay to talk about your pain in English, it is. It's okay if it's messy. It's okay if you don't know all the words. The most important thing is that it's yours.
And you don't have to tell it the way others do. Some people write poems. Others write diary entries, voice notes, short stories. Some just talk to a friend, one soft sentence at a time.
And even if no one else hears your story, even if it's something you only whisper to yourself in English, it still matters. Sometimes the simple act of putting it into words, even quietly, is enough.
Because pain that has no voice tends to grow heavier. But pain that gets spoken, even a little, begins to shift. It doesn't go away completely, but it becomes something you're holding, not something that's holding you.
And I think language plays such a powerful role in that. Like, the words you choose can shape how you feel. I was broken feels different from I was struggling. And I survived feels different from I barely made it. They're all true, but each one carries a different tone.
That's such a good point. Sometimes we don't realize that we can choose softer language, not to hide from what happened, but to speak about it in a way that feels safer to hold. Gentler to revisit.
Exactly. And learning English can give people a new set of tools for that. A kind of emotional vocabulary that maybe they didn't feel they had access to in their native language, or weren't allowed to use.
Or maybe the words in their first language come with too much history. Too many memories. But in English, those same words might feel like clean pages. A way to say what you feel without all the weight attached.
That's the beautiful thing, people aren't just translating their experiences. They're transforming them. Not changing the truth, but changing how they carry it. The posture. The pace. The permission.
And that can make all the difference. Because when you stop trying to force your pain into polished grammar, or perfect pronunciation, and you just let yourself speak with care, something in you relaxes.
Yeah. That moment when someone says, "This is hard for me to talk about, but," and then they keep going, that's strength. That's not weakness. That's not imperfection. That's real communication.
And English becomes more than a skill at that point. It becomes a space. A safe space. One that you're allowed to enter slowly. On your own terms. With your own story.
So maybe the question isn't how well can you tell your story in English. Maybe it's how kindly can you tell it, to yourself, first of all. With softness. With breath. With room to pause.
And sometimes you don't even realize how much you've been holding until you try to say it in English. You start with one word, and then suddenly it's a sentence. Then a whole memory you hadn't looked at in years.
Yeah, and in that moment, the words might come out slowly. There might be long pauses. That's not a language mistake, that's reflection. That's honesty being formed, one breath at a time.
And I really believe that's when English becomes something sacred. When it's not about showing how smart you are, but showing how human you are. Vulnerable. Real. Still healing, but speaking anyway.
You know, I think the mistake we make sometimes is thinking we have to explain everything perfectly. That if we talk about the hard stuff, it has to be complete, or poetic, or somehow fully resolved.
But real stories are rarely that tidy. Especially painful ones. You can say, "I'm not ready to talk about everything, but here's one piece." That's not incomplete, that's brave.
And for English learners, that's often where the power lives, in learning to say something difficult in a simple way. I felt lost. I miss my home. I didn't know how to ask for help. Those aren't advanced phrases, but they carry the weight of real life.
They really do. And those kinds of sentences. They build connection. Not just language practice. Real connection with others who hear you and say, "Me too." Or even just silently nod, because they felt it too.
Sometimes that's all we're looking for, isn't it? Not advice, not correction, just to be heard. Just to say, "This happened to me," and feel like someone's heart understands, even if their words are different.
And it's okay if you never share it publicly. It's okay if you only write it down in your notebook. Or say it in your mind during a walk. It still counts. It's still healing.
Because your story, especially the painful one, deserves to be held with care. And if English gives you just enough distance to hold it more gently, that's a gift. One you've given yourself.
So, speak slowly if you need to. Use simple words. Pause often. And remember, the goal isn't to impress. The goal is to speak without breaking yourself in the process.
It's interesting, isn't it, how often people think they have to leave their emotions at the door when learning a language. Like, let me be correct first, then maybe I can be honest later.
Yeah, and that's understandable. I mean, most of us were taught that language learning is about tests, scores, pronunciation drills. There's not much space in a textbook for grief. Or heartbreak. Or the feeling of being misunderstood for years.
But the truth is, a lot of people come to English not just to travel or pass an exam. They come to it because they want to say something they couldn't say before. Or say it differently. Or say it safely.
I've seen that happen again and again. A learner starts with, I don't know how to say this, or, this might sound strange, and then they share something raw, like how they felt invisible growing up, or how hard it was to leave their country.
And the language doesn't get in the way. If anything, it helps shape the emotion. It slows things down. Gives them space to choose each word with care. Almost like walking through a memory with the lights dimmed, not so bright that it blinds you.
That image really fits. And that's why I think telling your painful story in English can be gentle, even if the story itself isn't. Because you're not rushing. You're not overwhelmed by emotion. You're just offering small pieces. At your own pace.
You don't need to explain everything at once. You can begin with, I didn't feel safe there. Or, that time changed me. You don't owe anyone the full version. Especially not if it costs you your peace.
And that's something worth repeating. You don't owe anyone the whole story. Sometimes we need to tell it in pieces to ourselves first, before we let anyone else hear it.
Or we need to write it out in English first. Quietly. Privately. Even just a paragraph. Even just a list of words that represent what we went through. It's not about grammar. It's about giving your experience shape.
And once it has shape, you can hold it more softly. You can sit with it instead of avoiding it. And slowly, over time, you realize, you're not trapped in the story anymore. You're the one telling it now.
And that's powerful. Because once you're telling your story, even in a quiet voice, even in your second language, you're no longer just surviving it. You're shaping it. Reclaiming it. And healing in the process.
And healing doesn't always look like big breakthroughs. Sometimes it's just the fact that you said something today you couldn't say last year. Even if it was just one sentence. Even if it took you 5 minutes to find the right words.
That's something I wish more learners could recognize, that progress in English isn't just about speed or fluency. Sometimes, it's about depth. It's about the moment you finally describe something that used to be stuck inside.
And it's a moment no one else might even notice. But you feel it. You know when you've crossed a quiet line, when you've put a piece of your truth into words for the first time.
And maybe for the first time in your life, it doesn't feel like a burden anymore. It just feels like something real. Something that happened. Something you've survived.
Because pain wants to be acknowledged, not buried. And language, especially a second language, can give you a gentle way to acknowledge it without being pulled under again.
It's that shift from, this is too big to say, to, this is mine to say, and I'll say it my way. Even if it's quiet. Even if it's imperfect. That shift is where freedom starts.
And you don't have to rush to tell everything. Some stories can take years to put into words. Some don't need to be spoken out loud at all. But knowing you can, knowing the words are there when you need them, that's powerful.
It really is. And sometimes, the act of learning English gives people those words, those gentle phrases that allow them to sit with what they've lived through, not push it away, not relive it, just sit with it.
Even something as simple as saying, "It still hurts," or "I'm learning how to live with it," can change the way we relate to pain. It's no longer this silent, hidden thing. It becomes something we walk beside, with kindness.
And you're right, it's not about removing the pain. It's about creating space around it. Space to breathe, space to feel, space to move forward without pretending it never happened.
So maybe English, for some of us, isn't just a new language. It's a softer language. One that lets us speak truths we've never dared to say before, and do it in a way that doesn't break us open.
So wherever you are in your English journey, and wherever you are in your healing, just know that your story matters. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be fluent. It just needs to be yours.
And if English gives you the space to tell it with more kindness, more patience, and more peace, then that's not just language learning. That's something deeply human. And deeply beautiful.
Thanks for sitting with us today, not just to practice English, but to reflect. We'll be here again soon.
Take care of yourself. And speak gently, to others, and especially to you.